In the early 1800s, during the 19th century, on a wide cotton plantation in the American South, life followed a strict and cruel order that few people ever questioned. The land stretched for miles, covered in white cotton fields that looked peaceful from far away, but up close they were places of endless labor and silent suffering. The plantation belonged to a man known in the region for his wealth, discipline, and pride. People spoke his name with respect and sometimes with fear. He believed the world worked best when everyone stayed in their place. The plantation owner woke before sunrise every morning. From his large wooden house built on higher ground, he could see almost the entire property. This view made him feel powerful. To him, the land, the house, the crops, and even the people working in the fields were all part of the same possession. He had inherited much of this wealth from his father, who had taught him that kindness was weakness and control was survival. Over the years, he had learned how to smile in public while ruling his land with an iron hand. His daughter was the center of his private world. She was born into comfort and raised away from the harsh realities of plantation life. From a young age, she was taught to read, write, and behave like a proper young woman of her class. She wore clean dresses, ate warm meals, and slept in a soft bed every night. Servants attended to her needs, and her father believed this protected her from the ugliness of the world outside the house. He wanted her to be obedient, quiet, and respectable, because to him, her behavior reflected his honor. Beyond the house, hundreds of enslaved men and women worked from dawn until night. Their lives were ruled by bells, orders, and punishment. Among them was a man who had been born into slavery and knew no other life. He was strong from years of labor, but his strength came with constant pain. He understood how to stay invisible, how to listen more than he spoke, and how to survive in a system that offered him no mercy. The plantation owner barely noticed him as a person. To the owner, he was simply another tool used to keep the plantation running. The plantation ran like a machine. Overseers watched the fields closely. Any mistake was punished. Any sign of resistance was crushed quickly. The owner believed this harshness was necessary. In church on Sundays, he sat in the front row and spoke of honor, family, and tradition. People admired him because he was successful. They did not ask how that success was built. The daughter grew up hearing the same lessons again and again. She was told that slavery was normal, that it was God's will, and that her family was doing nothing wrong. For many years, she believed it. But as she grew older, small moments began to trouble her. She noticed the tired faces in the fields. She heard quiet cries at night when the house was silent. These thoughts made her uncomfortable, and she pushed them away because questioning her father felt impossible. As the 19th century moved forward, change was slowly stirring in the wider world. There were whispers of abolition, freedom, and reform. Newspapers carried stories of resistance and escape, but on this plantation, time felt frozen. The owner believed his land was protected from outside ideas. He trusted his power, his money, and his reputation to keep everything exactly as it was. The year everything changed did not begin with noise or drama. It began like any other year, with the same routines and the same rules. The cotton grew well that season, and profits looked promising. The owner felt confident. He believed he had complete control over his world. This belief made him careless in ways he did not realize at the time. Inside the house, the daughter felt growing pressure. She was no longer a child, and expectations followed her everywhere. Her father spoke often about marriage, about alliances with other wealthy families, and about preserving the family name. She felt trapped between obedience and fear. She had no voice in deciding her future. Her life, like the lives of the enslaved people outside, was shaped by her father's will, though in very different ways. The enslaved man noticed changes before others did. Years of survival had taught him to observe carefully. He sensed tension in the house, heard raised voices behind closed doors, and saw the owner pacing more often than usual. Something was wrong. On a plantation, when the master was troubled, everyone suffered. Fear spread quietly among the enslaved workers because they knew trouble at the top often meant harsher punishment below. The plantation owner began to worry about things he could not control. Reputation mattered more to him than truth. He believed that one mistake, one scandal, could undo decades of hard work. The society he lived in was unforgiving, especially when it came to women and family honor. He knew that if his name was damaged, his power would weaken. This fear slowly began to guide his thoughts. At night, the owner sat alone in his study, thinking about legacy. He remembered his father's words about doing whatever was necessary to protect the family. He convinced himself that harsh decisions were sometimes the only way forward. In his mind, morality bent easily when power was at risk. He did not think about the human cost of his choices. The daughter sensed the change in her father. His tone grew colder. His eyes watched her more closely. She felt like something precious was slipping away, though she could not yet name it. She wanted to speak, to explain, to ask for understanding, but fear kept her silent. On this plantation, silence was survival for many people. As the year moved on, the calm surface of plantation life hid a growing storm. Every person, from the master in his fine clothes to the enslaved man in the fields, stood unknowingly at the edge of a moment that would change their lives forever. What seemed like an unbreakable system was about to be tested in a way no one expected. This was the year everything changed, not because the world suddenly became just, but because one man's fear pushed him towards a decision that would expose the truth behind his power. And from this point forward, nothing on the plantation would ever feel the same again.
The secret did not come out in a loud or dramatic way. It surfaced slowly, like a shadow growing longer each day. At first, the plantation owner only sensed that something was wrong. His daughter became quiet, distracted, and distant. She avoided his eyes and spent more time alone. Small changes like these would have meant nothing in another household, but on this plantation, nothing escaped the owner's notice. He had always believed he knew everything about his daughter's life. He had planned her future in his mind for years. She would marry into another respected family, strengthen business ties, and continue the family's name. Her life was not her own in his eyes. It was an extension of his legacy. So when he sensed distance between them, it felt like a personal threat. One evening, during supper, he noticed her hands trembling as she lifted her spoon. She barely touched her food. He asked a simple question about her day, but her answer came out nervous and rushed. The room felt heavy with silence. The owner said nothing more, but his mind began working. He had learned long ago that silence often hid trouble. That night, he called for one of the house servants and asked careful questions. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. The servant hesitated, knowing that truth could be dangerous. After a long pause, the servant shared bits of gossip whispered around the house. Nothing was clear, but it was enough to confirm the owner's fear. There was a secret, and it involved his daughter. Over the next few days, he watched her closely. Every movement, every glance, every moment of hesitation became evidence in his mind. The more he watched, the more certain he became that something had gone terribly wrong. His thoughts moved quickly from concern to anger, and then to fear. Not fear for his daughter's happiness, but fear for his reputation. In the society he lived in, a man's honor meant everything. One scandal could destroy years of carefully built respect. A whisper could turn allies into enemies. He knew how cruel society could be, especially toward women. If people believed his daughter had crossed a line, it would not only ruin her life, but his as well. Business partners would turn away, neighbors would judge, his authority would weaken. Finally, he confronted her. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His calm was more frightening than anger. He asked direct questions and waited. At first, she tried to deny it. Then she cried. Then, slowly, the truth began to fall apart in pieces. It was not the kind of truth that could be fixed with a simple lie or a quick marriage arrangement. When he understood the full danger of the situation, his face went cold. He did not comfort her. He did not ask how she felt. His first words were about shame and disgrace. He told her she had been careless, selfish, and foolish. He reminded her of everything he had given her and everything she owed him in return. The daughter stood there, feeling smaller with every word. She realized in that moment that her father's love had limits. Those limits were drawn around his pride. She wanted to explain herself, to say she was scared and confused, but she could see it would not matter. He was already thinking about solutions, not feelings. That night, the plantation owner did not sleep. He walked back and forth in his study, replaying conversations and imagining the worst possible outcomes. He thought about neighbors finding out. He thought about church whispers. He thought about rivals enjoying his fall. Each thought tightened his chest. His mind turned toward control. He believed every problem could be solved if handled quietly and firmly. He had done it before with business disputes and land conflicts. This, he told himself, was no different. Someone would pay the price, but the family name would survive. As his thoughts darkened, they also became more dangerous. He began to look at the people around him, not as humans, but as tools. On the plantation, he already owned bodies and labor. In his twisted reasoning, using that power to erase a scandal felt natural. Meanwhile, the enslaved man continued his work, unaware of how close his life was drifting toward danger. He noticed the overseers were tense. Orders came sharper than usual. The owner's presence in the fields became more frequent. These signs told him trouble was coming. On plantations, trouble always traveled downward. The daughter was confined more closely. She was no longer allowed to walk freely or speak privately with servants. Her movements were controlled as tightly as he controlled the fields. Isolation made her fear grow. She felt trapped in her own home, punished for something she barely understood herself. The plantation owner told himself he was protecting his family. He convinced himself that harsh actions were necessary. In his mind, the world was cruel, and survival required cruelty in return. He ignored the voice inside him that warned this path would lead to ruin. As days passed, pressure built like heat before a storm. The secret could not remain hidden forever. The owner knew time was working against him. Every delay increased the risk of exposure. He needed a solution that would silence rumors before they began. By the end of that week, his mind had settled on an idea so shocking that he barely recognized it as his own. It was a decision shaped by fear, power, and a lifetime of believing he was above consequence. To him, it seemed clever, necessary, clean. To everyone else, it would later become the moment when his true character was revealed. This was the dangerous secret, not just what his daughter had done, but what he was now willing to do to protect himself.
The plantation owner did not announce his decision right away. He kept it locked inside his mind, turning it over again and again until it felt firm and unavoidable. To him, this was not cruelty. He told himself it was order. He believed that powerful men were meant to make hard choices, even if others suffered because of them. He began by convincing himself that there were no good options left. Marriage to a respectable family was no longer possible. Sending his daughter away would raise questions. Killing rumors before they started required something extreme, something that would shock the truth into silence. In his world, silence mattered more than justice. Late one night, he stood by the window of his study, looking out over the plantation. The moonlight fell on the fields where enslaved men and women slept in small cabins after long days of work. He saw them as shadows, not people. That way of thinking made his next step easier. His mind settled on one of the enslaved men, someone quiet and well known for obedience. The man had no family ties the owner cared about, no voice in society, and no protection. In the owner's twisted logic, this made him useful. If blame ever fell, it would fall downward, never upward. The next morning, the owner called for the overseer and gave vague instructions. He asked questions about certain workers, their behavior, their strength, their silence. The overseer answered without curiosity. On plantations like this, questions were not meant to be questioned. By afternoon, the enslaved man was summoned to the main house. This alone was frightening. Enslaved workers were rarely called inside unless punishment or danger waited. As he walked toward the house, his heart beat faster, but his face stayed calm. Years of survival had taught him that showing fear only made things worse. Inside, the air felt heavy. The owner sat at his desk, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He did not greet the man or look him in the eye at first. Silence filled the room, long enough to make the man's hands shake. When the owner finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. He explained nothing clearly. He spoke in commands and half-truths. He said the man was being given an order and that obedience would be rewarded, while refusal would be punished severely. No choice was offered, only consequences. The enslaved man listened carefully. He understood enough to know that his life was being pulled into something dangerous and deeply wrong. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but he knew better. Words could be used against him. Silence, again, was survival. The owner then spoke to his daughter. He did not ask her opinion. He told her what would happen, as if reading instructions from a book. His words were cold, practical, and final. He said this arrangement would solve the problem. He said it was for the good of the family. He said she would obey. The daughter felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She had known her father was capable of cruelty, but this decision shattered something inside her. She realized she was no more free than the people outside the house. Her pain, however, meant nothing to him compared to his fear of shame. She cried and begged him to reconsider. She said this was wrong. She said people would find out anyway. Her father's face hardened. He told her that disobedience would destroy what little protection she still had. His words were not loud, but they were sharp enough to cut. The enslaved man was dismissed without explanation. As he walked back to the cabins, his legs felt weak. Other workers noticed his pale face and quiet steps. They did not ask questions. Everyone knew that asking could bring trouble. That evening, the plantation felt different. The air was tense. Even the overseers seemed uneasy. Something unnatural had been set in motion. The owner walked the grounds with restless energy, reassuring himself that he had done the right thing. In his mind, he was fixing a mistake. He told himself that enslaved people were already suffering, so using one of them to protect his family was not truly adding harm. This lie helped him sleep that night. The daughter lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. Her childhood beliefs collapsed one by one. She understood now that love in her father's world was conditional. Obedience mattered more than humanity. She felt fear, shame, and anger twisting together inside her chest. The enslaved man also did not sleep. He sat outside his cabin, listening to the night sounds. He knew his future no longer belonged to him. He did not know exactly what awaited him, but he understood that the master's power could destroy him at any moment. Still, somewhere deep inside, he promised himself one thing. He would not let this decision turn him into what the owner believed he was. Over the next few days, the owner prepared carefully. He adjusted work schedules. He limited movement around the house. He controlled who spoke to whom. Everything was planned to keep questions away. He believed control could bury truth. But control has a weakness. It relies on silence from many people at once, and silence is never as strong as those who demand it believe. The decision that was meant to protect the plantation owner's honor had already begun to rot from the inside. The weight of it pressed on everyone involved. Fear spread quietly like a sickness. This was the moment when a line was crossed. The owner believed he had secured his power. In reality, he had exposed it. What followed would prove that even the strongest systems can be shaken when built on cruelty. And this was only the beginning.
The enslaved man woke before sunrise, as he always did, but that morning his body felt heavier than usual. His mind replayed the moment he had been called to the main house, the cold voice of the owner, the warning hidden inside every word. Nothing had been said clearly, yet everything was understood. His life had been pushed onto a path he did not choose, and there was no safe way to step off it. He had been born on a different plantation and sold when he was still young. Since then, he had learned one lesson better than any other. Choice did not belong to people like him. Every day was shaped by commands, bells, and threats. Saying no was not courage, it was a death wish. He had seen men beaten for less. He had seen families broken apart because someone spoke at the wrong time. As he walked to the fields, he kept his face calm. Inside, fear moved like a slow fire. He thought about running, but he knew where that road ended. Dogs, chains, a warning made of blood. Escape stories existed, but so did graves. He had survived this long by knowing when not to dream. The other workers noticed his silence. They noticed how his eyes stayed low and how he avoided conversation. No one asked why. On plantations, curiosity could be punished just as harshly as disobedience. Still, a quiet worry passed between them. When one person was singled out, it rarely ended with just one person suffering. As the sun climbed higher, the overseer came closer than usual, watching him work. Every movement felt judged, every pause felt dangerous. The enslaved man focused on his breathing, on the feel of the cotton in his hands, on anything that kept his thoughts from breaking apart. He reminded himself that fear could make a man careless, and carelessness could get him killed. By afternoon, he was summoned again. This time there was no overseer, only a servant leading him silently toward the house. Each step felt unreal, like walking into a storm you could already hear but not yet see. His hands shook, but he kept them hidden. Inside the house, he was not treated like a guest or even like a person. He was told where to stand and when to move. Instructions came without explanation. There was no room for questions. He understood then that his role was to obey fully and speak as little as possible. Survival depended on becoming invisible. He thought about his mother, long gone, who had once told him that dignity was something no one could truly take from you unless you gave it away. At the time, he had not understood. Now, standing in a place where his life could be decided in seconds, her words came back to him clearly.
He could not control what was being done to him, but he could control who he became inside. When he saw the plantation owner's daughter, he did not look at her for long. He knew how easily glances could be twisted into lies. He knew how quickly blame could be placed on him. He kept his eyes lowered, his posture respectful, his voice quiet when spoken to. Every action was chosen carefully, like stepping across a river on slippery stones. The daughter looked frightened, but he did not mistake fear for kindness. Fear could still harm him if it turned into panic or anger. He did not trust the situation, and he did not trust anyone with power in that house. Trust had never been rewarded in his life. Days passed under strict watch. His movements were controlled more than ever. He was separated from others and given orders that made no sense to him except in one way. He was being isolated. Isolation made people easier to control. It also made them easier to blame. At night, alone with his thoughts, fear returned stronger. He imagined every possible ending. Some were quick, others were slow and painful. He did not pray for freedom anymore. He prayed for clarity. He prayed to make the right choices when mistakes could cost everything. Despite the danger, something unexpected happened inside him. Instead of anger, he felt a steady calm grow. Fear had been part of his life for so long that it no longer ruled him. He understood the system too well to believe it was fair. That understanding gave him a strange kind of strength. He decided that if he was forced into this situation, he would not allow it to turn him into what the owner expected. He would not act with cruelty. He would not give the owner a reason to destroy him. He would be careful, respectful, and controlled in every moment. The plantation owner believed power meant control over others. The enslaved man knew a different truth. Real control was the ability to hold on to yourself when everything else was taken. This belief became his anchor. The daughter noticed his behavior. She expected anger or desperation, but instead she saw restraint. He did not speak unless spoken to. He did not overstep. He did not look for advantage. This confused her. She had been taught that enslaved people were dangerous, impulsive, and less than human. His actions challenged everything she had been told. Wordless moments passed between them, heavy with tension and misunderstanding. Neither of them had chosen this path, yet both were trapped on it. The difference was that one still had protection, while the other had none. The enslaved man remained aware that one mistake could end his life. A wrong tone, a misunderstood look, a lie told by someone else. He lived each moment with care, like glass under his feet. Outside the house, rumors began to move quietly. Workers noticed changes in schedules and rules. They sensed that something was wrong, even if they didn't know what. Fear traveled fast on plantations because it was familiar. The owner believed his plan was working. He saw obedience and mistook it for success. He did not see the tension building beneath the surface. He did not see how closely people were watching. For the enslaved man, every day was survival. He had no power, no protection, and no voice. Yet in the middle of that darkness, he held on to something stronger than fear, the decision to remain human in a system designed to deny his humanity. That choice, quiet and unseen, would soon become the most dangerous thing of all.
What no one expected was how the enslaved man behaved once the situation was forced upon him. The plantation owner believed fear would control everything. He believed silence meant submission. He believed power always won. But the man did not act the way power expected him to act. From the very beginning, the enslaved man moved with careful distance. He followed orders exactly, but never more than required. He spoke politely, never raising his voice.
He showed respect without weakness. This balance confused the people watching him. They were used to seeing fear turn into anger, or anger turn into mistakes. Instead, they saw restraint. The plantation owner noticed it first. He had expected signs of desperation, perhaps even behavior he could later use as proof of guilt. But there were none. The man gave him nothing. No rumors, no excuses, no openings. This made the owner uneasy, though he did not admit it to himself. Inside the house, servants whispered. They watched closely, expecting trouble. Instead, they saw calm where they expected chaos. The enslaved man kept his eyes lowered and his movements controlled. He never tried to take advantage of the situation. He never crossed boundaries. Every step he took was measured, as if he understood that one wrong move could destroy him. The daughter noticed it too. At first, she was overwhelmed by fear and shame. She had been taught to see enslaved people as dangerous and untrustworthy. Yet the man placed in her life against both their wills did nothing to harm her. He treated her with quiet respect, almost as if he were protecting her from the very situation her father had created. This behavior confused her deeply. She had expected cruelty, or at least bitterness. Instead, she saw patience. It made her uncomfortable because it forced her to question everything she believed about power and character. Days passed, and still nothing happened the way the plantation owner had imagined. There were no scandals, no careless actions, no reasons for punishment. The plan was supposed to end a problem quickly. Instead, it created a new one: doubt. The owner began to feel watched, not just by servants or workers, but by his own conscience, though he would never use that word. He told himself the man's behavior was an act, a trick. He waited for the moment when the mask would fall, but it did not. Among the enslaved workers, quiet talk began. They noticed that the man was being treated differently, watched more closely, yet punished less than expected. This was strange. On plantations, attention usually meant suffering. The absence of it made people curious. The man himself stayed alert. He knew better than to relax. He understood that restraint was not safety, only delay. Still, he held on to his decision to remain careful. He believed dignity, even in chains, could be a form of resistance. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, the daughter saw him helping an older worker who had collapsed from exhaustion. He did it quickly, gently, and without drawing attention. This small moment stayed with her. It was not dramatic, but it was real. She had never seen her father show such care to anyone outside his own circle. Slowly, her fear shifted into something else. She began to see the situation clearly for the first time. Her father's decision was not about protection, it was about control. The man in front of her was not the danger, the system was. The plantation owner grew more frustrated as time passed. His plan had not delivered the sense of relief he expected. Instead of burying the problem, it exposed something uncomfortable. He had placed two people in an impossible situation, and one of them was handling it more honor than he ever had. At church, he felt eyes on him. No one said anything, but he imagined judgment everywhere. The enslaved man's quiet behavior made the owner feel smaller, though he could not explain why. Power was supposed to bring peace. Instead, it brought restlessness. The servants began to treat him differently too. Not openly, not enough to be punished, but subtly. They spoke to him with more caution, more respect. They saw that he was not reckless. They saw that he was trying to survive without harming anyone else. This shift unsettled the plantation's balance. The system depended on clear roles, master above, enslaved below. The man's behavior blurred that line, not through rebellion, but through humanity. That was far more dangerous. The daughter started asking questions she had never asked before, quiet ones, careful ones. She noticed how rules applied differently depending on who you were. She noticed how suffering was ignored when it was familiar. The man's restraint forced her to confront truths she had been protected from her entire life. The plantation owner sensed her change and tightened control. He spoke more sharply. He reminded her of obedience and duty. But something had already shifted. Once you see truth, it cannot be unseen. The enslaved man remained aware that everything could still collapse. He trusted no one fully. He understood that respect could disappear overnight. Still, he continued to act with the same quiet discipline. It was not bravery in the way stories describe it. It was survival mixed with principle. What shocked everyone was not a dramatic act or a loud refusal. It was consistency. Day after day, the man proved that character did not come from power, but from choice. Even when choice was limited, it still mattered. This unexpected moral strength began to crack the image the plantation owner had built of himself. He had always believed wealth and authority defined worth. Now, without meaning to, he had placed himself next to someone who proved otherwise. The situation he created to protect his name was slowly doing the opposite. People were watching more closely. Whispers were forming, not about scandal, but about injustice. And at the center of it all was a man who had no power, yet refused to lose himself. That was the moment everything truly began to change. The change in the daughter did not happen all at once. It came slowly, through small moments she could not ignore anymore. At first, she tried to hold on to the beliefs she was raised with. She told herself that her father knew best, that this pain was temporary, that order had to be maintained. But the longer she lived inside the reality he had created, the harder those lies became to believe. She began to notice details she had never paid attention to before. The way the enslaved workers moved carefully, always watching, always alert. The way their shoulders stayed tense, even during rest. She noticed how quickly smiles disappeared when overseers came near. These were things she had seen all her life, but never truly looked at. Now she could not stop looking. Every day she was reminded that her own freedom was limited. Her father decided where she went, who she spoke to, and when she was allowed outside. That control frightened her, but it also opened her eyes. For the first time, she understood that what she felt was a small taste of what enslaved people lived with every day. The enslaved man's behavior played a quiet but powerful role in her awakening. He did not act bitter or angry. He did not try to frighten her or gain sympathy. He simply remained careful, respectful, and distant. That distance was important. It showed her that he understood the danger better than she ever could. She expected resentment from him. She expected blame. Instead, she saw restraint. This confused her deeply. If he had every reason to hate her and her family, why didn't he? The question stayed with her, growing heavier each day. One afternoon, she overheard two servants talking in low voices. They spoke about a woman in the fields who had been whipped for slowing down after her child fell sick. The daughter felt sick listening. She had walked past that woman many times without thinking. Now she could not stop imagining the pain, the fear, the injustice of it. That night she cried alone in her room, not just for herself, but for everything she was beginning to understand. She realized her comfort had always been built on someone else's suffering. This truth hurt more than anything her father had said to her. Her father noticed the change in her behavior. She asked fewer questions about dresses and social events. She spoke less at the dinner table. Her eyes no longer filled with excitement when he talked about the future. Instead, there was distance and something else he did not like: judgment. He tried to correct this the only way he knew how, with authority. He reminded her of duty. He spoke of obedience and family honor. He warned her not to let sympathy weaken her.
He told her the world was harsh and that softness was dangerous, but his words no longer worked the way they once had. She began to see her father clearly for the first time, not as a protector, but as a man driven by fear. Fear of gossip, fear of losing respect, fear of losing control. She understood that everything he had done was to protect himself, not her. This realization was painful. It felt like losing a parent while they were still alive. She watched how differently her father treated people depending on their status. His voice was polite with wealthy guests and cruel with those who served him. The contrast became impossible to ignore. She saw that power did not make him strong, it made him careless with other people's lives. The enslaved man never spoke to her about these things, yet his silence spoke louder than words. His careful distance showed her that he did not see her as someone to save him. He knew she had little power of her own. This honesty, unspoken but clear, forced her to confront her place in the system honestly. She started to ask herself difficult questions. What did it mean to be good in a bad system? Could someone remain innocent while benefiting from cruelty? Was silence the same as agreement? These thoughts frightened her because they had no easy answers. One morning, she saw her father punish a young enslaved boy for a mistake that was not his fault. The boy did not cry out. He simply stood there, taking it. Something inside her broke. She realized that silence was exactly how this system survived. That day, she spoke back to her father for the first time. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. She told him it was wrong. She told him people were suffering. She told him he was hurting others to protect his pride. Her father's face changed. He did not argue with her words. He dismissed them. He told her she was being emotional, foolish, and ungrateful. He reminded her who held power in the house. But something had already changed between them. The distance grew wider. She understood then that awakening did not mean immediate freedom. It meant discomfort. It meant fear. It meant standing alone in a house that no longer felt safe. But it also meant honesty. The daughter began to see the enslaved man not as a symbol of her shame, but as a person trapped by the same force that trapped her, her father's control. The difference was that she still had protection, while he had none. This realization filled her with guilt, but also with responsibility. She knew she could not undo what had been done. She knew the system was bigger than her, but she also knew she could no longer pretend ignorance. Once a person truly sees injustice, looking away becomes a choice. The plantation owner believed his authority was unchallenged. He did not see that his greatest loss was already happening. He was losing the loyalty and trust of his own child. And the daughter, once sheltered and obedient, was becoming something dangerous to a system built on silence, a witness who could no longer unsee the truth. This awakening did not bring peace. It brought tension, fear, and uncertainty, but it also brought clarity. And clarity, once born, cannot be controlled.
The secret was never meant to leave the walls of the plantation house, but secrets have a way of escaping, especially when fear surrounds them. It did not spread all at once. It moved slowly, carried by looks, pauses, and changes in routine that people could feel even if they could not explain them. The first sign was the change in how the plantation ran. Work schedules shifted without reason. Certain paths were suddenly restricted. Some servants were reassigned, while others were warned to keep quiet. These changes made people uneasy. On a plantation, when rules changed suddenly, it usually meant trouble with hiding somewhere. The servants noticed everything. They always did. They saw who was allowed near the main house and who was not. They saw the enslaved man being watched more closely than others. They saw the daughter rarely smiling, rarely leaving her room. No one spoke openly, but silence itself became suspicious.
Whispers began in the kitchens and near the cabins late at night. People spoke in half-sentences, careful not to say too much. Questions were asked without words. Why was the master so tense? Why was he watching everyone so closely? Why did the house feel heavy, like a storm waiting to break? The plantation owner felt the shift, even if he pretended not to. He sensed eyes on him wherever he went. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. Smiles felt forced. Respect felt thinner. The quiet obedience he once relied on now felt fragile. He tried to regain control the only way he knew how, by tightening it. Punishments became harsher for small mistakes. Orders were repeated more sharply. He believed fear would seal mouths shut. Instead, it made people more alert, more observant, more likely to notice the cracks. The enslaved man understood what was happening. He had lived his whole life under systems that pretended to be strong, but were actually built on fear. He knew that when fear increased, mistakes followed. He remained careful, speaking even less than before. Still, he could feel attention turning toward him. Other enslaved workers began to treat him differently, not with blame, but with concern. They sensed danger around him, the kind that could spill over onto others. Some avoided him to protect themselves. Others watched quietly, waiting to see what would happen. The plantation daughter felt the pressure too. She noticed how servants avoided her eyes, how conversations stopped when she entered a room. She realized that people were beginning to guess that something was wrong. Her father's plan to hide the truth was failing. One afternoon, a visiting neighbor arrived unexpectedly. The plantation owner greeted him with a forced smile, but tension filled the air. During their conversation, the neighbor made a small comment, nothing direct, just a question about changes on the plantation. The owner answered quickly, too quickly. The neighbor noticed. That was how rumors truly began, not through facts, but through reactions. Soon, questions reached the church. People noticed the owner's restless behavior during services. They noticed her daughter's distant expression. They noticed the enslaved man's unusual treatment. No one spoke openly, but stories began to form in the spaces between truth and imagination. The plantation owner felt the whispers and felt panic rise. This was what he had feared from the beginning, not truth, but exposure. He realized that control had limits. He could rule his land, but not people's thoughts. His frustration turned inward, then outward. He blamed the enslaved man for existing. He blamed his daughter for weakness. He blamed society for cruelty, even though he was part of it. In his mind, everyone else was at fault. The daughter watched her father unravel. His authority no longer felt solid. His anger came faster. His patience disappeared. She saw clearly now that power built on fear could not survive scrutiny. She also realized something else. People were watching her. Her reactions mattered. If she stayed silent, the lie might survive longer. If she showed doubt, the truth would grow stronger. This knowledge frightened her because it gave her responsibility she had never wanted. The enslaved man remained quiet, but his presence alone kept the tension alive. The owner had expected him to fade into the background. Instead, he became the center of unspoken attention, not because of anything he did, but because of what was being done to him. One night, a servant made a small mistake, mentioning a detail to the wrong person. It was harmless on its own, but combined with existing rumors, it added shape to the story. Now people were not just guessing that something was wrong, they were beginning to believe it. The plantation owner tried to shut everything down. He threatened servants with punishment. He warned overseers to watch their tongues. He reminded everyone who held power. But fear could not erase curiosity, it only sharpened it. The enslaved workers felt the tension tightening like a rope. They knew that when masters felt threatened, violence often followed. Many prepared themselves quietly for worse days ahead. Fear returned to the cabins like an old enemy. The daughter realized the truth could not be hidden forever. The plan meant to protect her father's reputation was doing the opposite. It was exposing his cruelty, his desperation, and his lack of control. The system that once protected him now was turning its eyes toward him. The plantation owner stood at the center of it all, watching his world slip. He still believed he could fix it. He still believed power would save him, but power had already begun to fail. The secret was no longer just a secret. It was a weight pressing on everyone, forcing cracks into a structure built on silence. What began as whispers was slowly becoming something more dangerous, awareness. And once awareness spreads, it cannot be locked away again.
The end did not come with shouting or violence, and that was what shocked everyone the most. People had expected punishment, blood, or rebellion. Instead, the truth came out slowly, calmly, and in a way the plantation owner could not stop. The rumors had grown too large to control. Neighbors spoke quietly but confidently now. Church conversations felt heavier. Business partners began asking careful questions. The plantation owner realized that people were no longer guessing, they were judging, and judgment did not need proof to be powerful. He tried one last time to protect himself. He called in trusted men, spoke of lies and misunderstandings, and reminded them of his long-standing reputation. Some nodded, but their eyes told a different story. Respect based on fear fades quickly once fear stops working. The daughter was watching everything closely. She saw how quickly loyalty disappeared when power looked weak. She saw how people who once praised her father now kept their distance. This confirmed what she had already learned. The system protected itself, not people. For the first time, she made a choice of her own. When a respected neighbor directly asked her if the rumors were true, she did not deny them. She did not explain everything, but she did not lie. Her silence was different now. It was no longer obedience, it was refusal. That moment changed everything. The neighbor shared what he heard with others, carefully, responsibly, but honestly. Soon, the plantation owner understood that the story was no longer his to control. The truth was moving without him. People began to see the situation clearly. They saw a powerful man willing to destroy others to save himself. They saw an enslaved man forced into danger without consent. They saw a daughter used as a shield for pride, not protected as a human being. The shock was not what had happened, but who the plantation owner truly was. Business partners quietly pulled away. Deals slowed. Invitations stopped coming. His name, once spoken with admiration, was now spoken with caution. No court punished him. No law touched him. But socially, he fell. The plantation owner still had land, he still had money, but he lost the one thing he valued most, respect. Inside the plantation, the change was felt immediately. Overseers became careful. Servants became bolder in small ways. Enslaved workers noticed that the master no longer felt untouchable. Power had cracked, and everyone could see it. The enslaved man remained alive, which in itself felt like a victory. Many had expected his destruction to hide the truth, but now harming him would only confirm everything people believed. The owner's own fear protected him more than any kindness ever had. The man was not freed. The system did not suddenly become just, but something important had shifted. He was watched, not as property, but as proof. His dignity exposed the lie that power meant worth. The daughter made a quiet but permanent decision. She withdrew from her father emotionally. She no longer defended him. She no longer repeated his beliefs. She began to help where she could, carefully,
quietly, knowing how dangerous open defiance could be. Her relationship with her father never recovered. He blamed her for his fall, just as he blamed everyone else. He never accepted responsibility. He never apologized. In his mind, the world had betrayed him. But history remembers moments differently than people do. What shocked everyone was that no dramatic ending was needed. The truth alone was enough. The plantation owner lost influence not because of violence, but because people finally saw him clearly. The enslaved man did not become a hero in stories told aloud. He did not receive justice in the way justice should look, but his restraint, his refusal to become what power expected, changed something deeper. It forced people to question a system they had long accepted. The daughter's awakening did not fix the past, but it shaped her future. She would never again pretend ignorance. She would carry the weight of what she had seen, and that weight would guide her choices for the rest of her life. The plantation continued, but it was never the same. Fear no longer worked as cleanly. Silence no longer felt safe. People remembered what had happened, even when they pretended not to. This was the real shock. Not a single act, but a quiet collapse of authority. A man who believed he owned everything learned that truth cannot be owned. A system built on cruelty was weakened by dignity, and people who were once invisible became impossible to ignore. Nothing ended perfectly, but something important ended forever, the illusion that power alone could hide injustice. And once that illusion was gone, it never returned.